if the seed of Enoch returns back, and if Joseph Smith was correct in the teachings of the prophet Joseph Smith, there actually is a reference to Joseph Smith saying that in fact, maybe I'll just look it up really quickly here, but I'll just kind of paraphrase it. He said that the city of Enoch and the very foundations upon which it stood assumed an aerial position within our solar system. Welcome, everyone, to the podcast this week. I am so excited to have with me a dear friend of mine. She has been a colleague and a friend for many years, although she doesn't look like she's many years. But this is Kris Kimball. And Kris, thank you for coming and joining us today.
It's a pleasure to be here.
So this is going to be lesson number 29, and this is Doctrine and Covenants sections 77 through 80. And 77 has some really interesting things we're going to be talking about. But I understand that you've been now you teach gospel doctrine, I think, in your ward. Okay,
I do. Yes.
So you've been preparing for this. So
hopefully we've got some information to share. Yes. So section 77 is on the tail end of 76, which is an amazing revelations, since it was multiple revelations. But Joseph Smith and Sidney Rigdon have been doing a lot of work with. They call it a translation, but you can't really translate something that's already in your language. But it's more of an inspired version, going through the scriptures and getting inspiration and a download of what maybe needed to be corrected, since we know that the scriptures, the Bible, has had a lot of hands on it since it was originally written thousands of years ago. And so we've been fortunate enough to have Joseph Smith, who's a prophet, who was able to, not only with the translation of the Book of Mormon from the ancient records of the Nephites, but he's taken our current it would be the King James Version of the Bible, and has gone in and asked the Lord for inspiration. And the particular section that we're getting into that Rod just alluded to was section 77, which gets into a lot of a Q&A type of a format, where Joseph Smith is wanting to clear the air, so to speak, because there was a particular person by the name of Pelatiah Brown. I hope I said his name correctly. And any Browns that are descendants of this person, I apologize. But Joseph Smith said that he's one of the wisest heads among us, but he doesn't know what he's talking about in this particular sense, as far as the beasts that are referenced in Revelations. And he just had gotten a little bit concerned that things were not being interpreted correctly from Revelations, because he actually did not teach a lot from Revelations. But we have section 77, which gives us chapters 4 through 11. And he wants to kind of set the record straight of what those beasts are.
Okay, so that's a little bit of the historical kind of background of what's going on as we jump into section 77.
Exactly.
Now, those of you who have been following our podcast for quite a while, you know that we encourage you to read the lesson and participate with your gospel doctrine class. These are more of a supplemental thing, so we go into a few areas of the research of the information and kind of do more of a deep dive.
Exactly.
Today, brothers and sisters, we're going to do a pretty good deep dive.
You're going to want to get some snorkel equipment or something.
Yeah, you're going to want to get your tanks out for scuba gear.
Out, some oxygen.
Or, maybe one of those kind of helmet things that goes on over the top of everything. One of those. Because some of the things that are in the scriptures are things that are pretty difficult to understand and also to believe. But we are of the opinion that the scriptures are real, that they are literal in many senses. They're not always literal. I mean, obviously Christ spoke in parables at times. But the scriptures are pretty clear about some things, and they're things that would not be readily accepted in scientific terms or realm or whatever. And so some of the things we're going to be talking about today, I think you're going to find really interesting. We're going to try to back it up with scripture, and then you can bring it up to the Lord and ask for yourself what you think about this.
And I think you bring up a good point, Rod, because Section 77, the way it's written out with Joseph Smith writing down his questions and the answers he received, is really a good format for all of us to learn from, because
it's a great
we
pattern.
should be pondering everything and questioning everything that we read in Scripture for a couple of different reasons. One is you've got translations from one language to another. Meanings of words can change from one language to another language.
Mm-hmm.
You have the influence of the man who is doing the translation, or the
culture
rabbi, or
that he lives in, and
exactly
so forth.
the culture, the time frame, what their beliefs were at that time. So it's very important that we look at Scripture as a living thing that we want to talk to, that we want to ask questions of. Not living that it changes, but living that we can actually create a conversation with it. And a lot of times, if our listeners who are watching today, there's some resources you can even download on your phone. One would be having the Blue Letter Bible, which gives you access. It's a free app, and it gives you access to looking up words in the Old Testament to the Hebrew, and in the New Testament to the Greek origin. And that can help with getting some deeper meaning. So I love the fact that Joseph Smith has given us a template for Scripture study. And it's asking these questions and then taking it to the Lord, praying and pondering and thinking about it, and then waiting for those answers that will come when you are in the Scriptures.
That is a beautiful example. And thanks for bringing it up, because basically you don't really get answers unless you have questions.
You have to have questions. And that's how did Jesus, when he was in the multitude or in Jerusalem, he was always answering questions with his own question.
Mm-hmm.
When people would ask him things, he would come back with the question, because there's something that happens to the mind, and I can't tell you exactly what the cognitive function is, but it forces your mind to become engaged when you ask a question. It has to go into finding an answer and seeking an answer, where if you're just told information, your mind can kind of shut off and tune out.
Yeah. And also the things that you ask and have a question about, you retain so much better.
Yes.
When somebody talks to you about something, I mean, we've all had this experience, right? We go to our lessons and we listen, and we walk away, and the next day, what was told at the lesson? Not a clue. you know? Right. But if you are the one preparing the lesson, and you have to ask the questions, and you have to prepare so that you are able to even answer other people's questions, then you don't forget. I mean, it's so much better to be able to understand that. Yeah. So let's jump in there into section 77 here, and again, starting off with a question. This is specifically involving Revelations chapter 4 verse 6, and the question is asked of Joseph Smith: what is the sea of glass spoken of by John, 4th chapter and 6th verse of Revelation? The answer that Joseph Smith receives from the Lord is, it is the earth in its sanctified, immortal, and eternal state. And a sea of glass. Now that's an interesting thing. I know you had some thoughts about this sea of glass. Well,
the sea of glass, it's interesting because anciently the ancient Egyptians and the ancient Hebrews considered the heavens as the deep or the sea. And they have a tradition of the solar bark. When you die is where you use that solar bark, which is a ship. A bark is a ship, mm-hmm. and it goes up through the deep to exit this world. Wow. And so the deep can actually be referencing the heavens in a way, versus thinking that it's going to be a body of water here on this planet. It's just something to consider.
Yeah. In fact, just from a scientific standpoint, mm-hmm. let me share just a couple of things there. So why would they consider space as the deep? Because water is the most ubiquitous thing in space. No matter where they've looked with masers or the Hubble Deep Space or whatever, The signature that comes up the most in space is the water molecule. Now people go, well, wait a minute, but hydrogen is the number one element, and that's true. And the number three element is oxygen. But what do you have when you mix oxygen and hydrogen? H2O. Okay, because water is the water molecule is the molecule that is the most abundant in the entire universe. And so that's kind of an interesting thing to talk about space as being water.
Exactly.
Because that's what you see.
And this is coming from the ancients. This is from thousands of years ago when the ancients referenced the whole cosmic idea of an earth and a heaven and a hell. They had this reference of the deep being in the heavens.
Yeah.
And you leave on a solar bark.
Yeah, that is some awesome kind of insights on that.
Along the Milky Way. The Milky Way is tied into that as well.
Yeah. Now a couple other things from my background as far as the scientific background, and specifically geology, and that is a sea of glass is an interesting thing because glass is how does glass form? I mean, we have glasses, that we have glasses glass in our windows and things, and lenses on cameras and things. Where does glass come from?
Well, it has to come from a heat source.
Yeah. Well, essentially,
it's
you can make it from silicon dioxide, which is the primary ingredient of glass. It's what the mineral is that glass is made from. Mm-hmm. Sand is silicon dioxide, and also quartz or quartz-based rocks are silicon dioxide primarily. And when you melt quartz-based rocks, it's interesting because no matter how experimentally you try to do it, if you melt rocks into a liquid, basically a molten state, whenever that molten state cools back off into a solid, it comes back as glass. It starts off as quartz, but when it comes back from the molten state, it's actually glass. And glass and quartz, although they're both silicon dioxide, they are quite different in their structure. They have different index of refraction. They have different hardness. It actually changes the hardness of them. And there's some other aspects of it as well. But glass is not quartz and quartz is not glass, even though they're made of the same thing.
once they've gone through that process.
And part of the reason why the glass is different is because the quartz is what they call a structured molecular. The way that it has put itself together, essentially, it's an ordered structure, and glass is a disordered structure, meaning that it kind of it was molten, and all of a sudden it kind of froze into place, but it didn't get to make itself into what it would prefer to be in its organization. So quartz has some interesting properties. It's, like I said, it's harder. It's an 8 on the Mohs scale of hardness. It's just under diamond. And so forth. It's really hard rock, but whenever you melt rocks, it comes back as glass, and glass is quite a bit different. Now, when it talks about sea of glass, I'm kind of thinking just for a second about clear, kind of like your glasses that you have on right now. Mm-hmm. It's clear. It's essentially a mineral. Now, these may actually be plastic, possibly.
Right.
They kind of got away from the glass ones because they're so heavy.
Yeah.
But the sea of glass could be after the earth has gone through its refining fire at the end of everything.
Right. It's sanctified, so it has to go through. Mm-hmm. Right now, the earth is in a turmoil. It's got so much darkness that's on this earth. Mm-hmm. By the inhabitants that live on this earth is creating a lot of
all the sin and things going on.
Right, and so the earth itself is going to have to go through that refining. But it made me, when you were explaining that, it made me realize that quartz becomes it's the same. It has the same component, but yet it's different once it becomes the glass, and that is what can happen to us as individuals if we. The refiner's fire is never fun or easy or something we look forward to. But if it creates this sanctification where we actually become closer to God and that relationship of who we came down here to be, then you really aren't that old person.
Yeah.
Before you went through, even though you may have the same components of it, but you're not the same person because you went through that refiner's fire.
Yeah, and that actually goes into even the making of course, a lot of different things. When you go to refine it, for example, I've already given this example previously, so forgive me if you've seen that previous example. But there was a guy who was a silversmith, and he had a big ball of silver, and he would heat it up until it's just red hot, and then he would work with it and kind of keep doing these things to kind of get the impurities out. Mm-hmm. And the person came up and said, well, how do you know when it's pure, when it's pure enough? And he says, well, I keep working until these impurities keep coming out, and I know that I'm done when I can see my reflection in the silver.
Wow. And
that's kind of along the same lines that the Lord will continue to refine us and continue to put us through the fire, and continue to really try to refine us. Mm-hmm. Until we can see His reflection in our lives,
which could be
that we reflect Him,
which could be that sea of glass, that mm-hmm. reflection. Because I'm trying to remember exactly in the Greek, it did talk about a sea of glass is something that is transparent. You can see through that, mm-hmm. and so there's a beautiful analogy of really what we as children of God can go through.
Yeah. And the earth is going to go through the same process. It's mm-hmm. also got to be refined.
Exactly.
Also, in the process of making glass, the reason why glass is transparent is because when you have it in the molten state, a lot of the impurities will actually float up onto the surface, and that can be scraped off and scooped off of the molten glass, and they keep removing those impurities until what's left is just the pure silicon dioxide. And that's what makes the finest glass. The best, the clearest glass. Okay, so the earth in its sanctified, immortal, and eternal state. Verse 2, the question is, what are we to understand by the four beasts spoken of in the same verse? Would you like to go into that a little bit?
Yeah, again, when you get into Revelations and look at the Greek, the four beasts is living creatures. Mm-hmm. And could that be living creatures here in this world, or could it be living creatures somewhere in the heavens? I mean, it doesn't really clarify, but that's another something to think about.
Yeah, and I think that in Revelations, in these particular verses, it's mostly talking about things to come, things in the future, things that have not happened yet. So the answer to this from the Lord was they are figurative expressions, these four beasts, used by the Revelator John in describing heaven. I guess that would be like one of the things there, and the paradise of God, the happiness of man and of beasts, and of creeping things, and of the fowls of the air, that which is spiritual, being in the likeness of that which is temporal. Because our spirits, I mean, your spirit looks like you physically, and right. Same with me, and I think that's the same with animals and plants and things as well. Mm-hmm. That which is spiritual being in the likeness of that which is temporal, and that which is temporal in the likeness of that which is spiritual. So this is the reason why our Heavenly Father, when He appeared to Joseph Smith, He looked like a person. He was a man, mm-hmm. and He said that we were made after His likeness. So we don't look exactly like Him, no, but we're a representation of His offspring. The spirit of man in the likeness of His person, as also the spirit of the beast and every other creature which God has created. So I think that gives us some kind of interesting insights into what things may be like, right. in the future too.
Because Joseph Smith did talk about the fact that this is future information that John mm-hmm. is sharing with us. And he also, there's a reference where he talked about that some of these beasts were things that he'd never seen before, that they were not necessarily beasts that we see on our
that
earth
we're familiar
today,
with. Yeah.
that we're familiar with. Because if they're part of the heavens, we know that there's many, many worlds that are part of the creation of the cosmos that that our Jesus Christ created, and so we don't know what other things could look like on other planets and other worlds.
Yeah, I agree. So in verse 3, now this is interesting because this is almost like a follow-on question. It's not. I don't know if it was a standalone question to begin with, because it sounds like it was kind of, once those received the answer to verse 2, that it's kind of like, oh, that brings us to the next question, which is verse 3 kind of thing.
Right.
It says, are the 4 beasts limited to individual beasts, or do they represent classes or orders? And the answer is they are limited to 4 individual beasts, which were shown to John to represent the glory of the classes of beings in their destined order or sphere of creation in the enjoyment of their eternal felicity. So I think this is talking about probably after the judgment, and this is when we have the kingdoms and so forth, and there's 4 individual beasts there to represent the classes of beings in their destined order.
Yeah, and the thing I like too in that question is Joseph Smith is looking at different, what do these beasts look like? Do they just look like an individual beast, or he's looking for the symbolism of the beast. And again, I think we will be richly rewarded if we get out of looking at things literally and looking at the symbolism of what the beasts could represent versus the fact that there were 4 individual beasts.
Yeah. Okay, so then it goes into, so think of that for a second, that this is the classes of beings in their destined order. So this is, they're not predestined, but this is what they were destined to be in, or their sphere of creation and enjoyment of the eternal felicity. So if they're in eternal felicity, I think this is then, everybody is kind of in their different, terrestrial, telestial, celestial, and so forth.
Fulfilling the measure of their being, of what they were created for.
So question, verse number 4, what are we to understand by the eyes and wings which the beasts had? Answer, their eyes are a representation of light and knowledge, that is, they are full of knowledge, and their wings are a representation of power to move and to act, etc. So as I look at this, if this is talking about, I'm assuming that this is talking about things after the millennium, or maybe even, after everybody is in their individual realms and so forth, there's going to be all kinds of knowledge. And in section 76, the Lord just told us just last week about how there's different, like the sun, moon, and stars, basically the celestial, terrestrial, telestial, and that those who are in the telestial will have the ability to have people from the terrestrial come and kind of visit them, but they're not going to be able to go up to the terrestrial. And the same thing with the celestial. The celestial can come down and minister to the terrestrial and telestial people, but it doesn't go the other direction. Right.
Which makes you not really want to be in those lower realms. You want to strive, get sanctified so that you can be in the higher realm and have access to all the light and knowledge.
Yeah.
I mean, all the glory that God has for us is there if we make the right choices and seek Heavenly Father and Jesus Christ to get us to that place.
Yeah, so I love that idea of the being full of knowledge, because that's the people. And I've had this discussion with many people over the years, and I actually have brought this up in the first DVD set that I had, and that is, which is greater, faith or knowledge? And it's funny because a lot of members of the church will say, well, faith is greater than knowledge. And then I have to remind them how it is that Joseph Smith, there was this young man that, Joseph Smith went into the grove of trees with a tremendous amount of faith.
Right.
But when he walked out of that grove of trees, he no longer had faith that there was a God. He knew him.
He had knowledge, right.
And God is not God because he has faith that he can do things. God is God because he has knowledge. And in Alma chapter, the great chapter on faith, Alma 32, he says that you have faith to plant the seed, but once the seed grows, he says, then your knowledge becomes dormant because you know it's a good seed. Mm-hmm. So knowledge is ultimately the goal, and that's why God is knowledge. Basically, He is all knowledgeable. He knows all things.
Right.
And so that's a little bit of when they say they're full of knowledge, I think that's an important aspect of it, because the more knowledge you can have, the more you become like our Heavenly Father, who is all knowledge.
The interesting thing is the reference to wings are a representation of power, to move, to act. In our culture, we have a tradition of angels, which represent beings from heaven with wings. Mm-hmm. And a lot of that comes from the fact that that's how they have a lightness, a brightness about them that would make you think they had wings. But we know of angels as being able to have powers that we don't have, that can move, that can do things that we don't do. But it's an interesting concept, this wings, because even in the old Egyptian religion, Hathor, which is the mother god to the wife of Ammon, who, in fact, it's in our D&C, one of these chapters here, mm-hmm. Jesus Christ refers to himself as the son of Ammon. And Ammon is the Egyptian name for the father. Wow. And the Hathor is always represented by a winged disc, which represents being able to ascend. They can ascend into heaven. They are heavenly beings and divine beings that can go from this world up into the upper heavens.
Yeah, so basically the ability to translocate. Mm-hmm. to be able to move, or we're very limited. What we can do here, I mean, we can't go outside and jump up and
we're very
and
constricted with space and time in this dimension. Yep.
Yeah. So this is giving them additional power, and the wings basically, I think, is a representation of that mm-hmm. ability to move and to go about there. Okay. So verse 5. Question is, what are we to understand by the 24 elders spoken of by John? Answer: we understand that these elders whom John saw were elders who had been faithful in the work of the ministry and were dead. So these are all people who have lived previously on the earth. And of course, this is talking about, probably after the millennial reign. We're talking about after the judgment and so forth here. So they who belonged to the 7 churches and were then in the paradise of God. So now we know what spirit paradise is and spirit prison. Mm-hmm. So maybe this is talking about some point before the judgment.
Yeah, who belong to the 7 churches. So we have to look at, what does church actually represent? We need to write this question here after Joseph Smith got this down. Does church mean an individual church, or does it mean a concept of a level of progression? Yeah. We have in Matthew,
or even dispensations, possibly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And my Father has many mansions. Is this one of his mansions? Is it a level that we go to at some point in time? So again, see, churches is where I'd have mm-hmm. another question to ask.
A follow-up question.
Yes. Uh-huh.
Yeah. But it talks about the 24 elders. I think that's interesting, because that's essentially 2 quorums, as far as the
mm-hmm.
quorum of the 12. So right. You have 2 quorums. I think that's interesting because if you think about, Christ, when he set up his disciples over in the old world, he had a quorum over there, and then he comes over after his death here to the new world, and he sets up a quorum over here. But some of his other old quorum were still alive, right?
Right.
So they had essentially kind of 2 quorums at that point in time: old world, new world, Jerusalem, New Jerusalem. Mm-hmm. Where the law is going to go forth and the word's going to go forth. There's kind of like 2 separate groups here.
That is interesting. I really hadn't made that connection before, that they would have actually had simultaneous existence on the planet. Yeah. The 2 quorums.
Well, it's kind of funny because as members of the church, we kind of have this idea that there can only be one prophet at a time. But yet we all read about, Isaiah and all these other things, and multiple prophets. You have in the Book of Mormon, you have the prophet Nephi right before Christ comes, and then you have another prophet Samuel,
Mm-hmm.
the Lamanite, who comes and he prophesies and so forth. So the idea that we can only have one prophet at a time is not really scripture based, but we only acknowledge one prophet in our church. But we're going to kind of get into a couple of things here in the next couple of these verses that might be a little bit of an eye opener.
Yeah.
I mean,
Can't wait.
I'm thinking it might be. Anyway, okay. So verse 6. What are we to understand by the book which John saw, which was sealed on the back with 7 seals? Answer. We are to understand that it contains the revealed will, mysteries, and the works of God, the hidden things of his economy concerning this earth during the 7,000 years of its continuance or its temporal existence. This is a really hard pill to swallow for people who really want to believe in science.
Mm-hmm.
Is the earth really only 7,000 years of its continuance or its temporal existence? And so do we take that literal? Is that more of a figurative thing? Is the earth 4.56 billion years old? How old is the material of the earth?
And is 1,000 years a reference to what we look at as 1,000?
Mm-hmm.
1,000 could be a unit of measurement that
Period of
maybe
time.
means a lot.
Yeah. Well, let me kind of jump into that for just a few seconds. So concerning this earth in the 7,000 years of its continuous, if we, I want to go to a couple of scriptures here, and the first one is going to be Abraham chapter 3, verses 4 through 9. So let me, I'm going to pull this up here just a second. We're going to go back to take a look here at verses 4 through 9. So this is Abraham, and he says, "And the Lord said unto me, by the Urim and Thummim," there's that Urim and Thummim again.
Mm-hmm.
We keep talking about
Keep showing
the
up.
one that Joseph Smith supposedly
Right.
ignored to do the translation. But Abraham was good with using it.
Abraham was fine with using it.
Yeah.
I think Joseph was too.
No peepstone here
Yeah.
for Abraham. Okay, that Kolob was after the manner of the Lord. Because in Abraham it says that the Lord basically lives on the planet that's nigh unto Kolob. So a planet that's next to Kolob, which shall remain unnamed.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. According to its times and seasons in the revolutions thereof. So we're talking about the revolutions. Okay, so if we're talking about revolutions in days, what exactly is a day?
Exactly.
A day is the amount of time it takes for a specific planet to rotate 360 degrees on its axis to go from point A around and then return back to point A.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that is by definition a day, right? The Earth when we have a day, the Earth makes a full rotation on its axis, one rotation. One revolution was a day unto the Lord, after his manner of reckoning, it being 1,000 years according to the time appointed unto that whereupon thou standest.
Hmm.
Okay, so where we stand, we're standing on the earth.
Mm-hmm.
So in the same amount of time that it takes for the planet that God lives on, which is nigh unto Kolob, for it to make one rotation on its axis, one revolution on its axis, our earth will have gone around our sun 1,000 times.
1,000 times. Interesting.
Which basically means that the planet upon which God dwells is a supergiant planet.
Hmm.
It is a massive, massive planet because it's taking all this time for it to make a rotation on its axis that the earth is basically doing in this. And he actually says this, that's actually in there in the scriptures twice in 2 Peter. It also says the same thing, but let's go back to this for a second. This is the reckoning of the Lord's time, according to the reckoning of Kolob. So the Lord tells time based on the planet that he's living on. And then he takes that information and he says, okay, well, in the same amount of time. Now this is going to get a little bit into some fairly deep things here because there's people go, well, wait a minute, but there's no time with God. He sees everything past, present, and future. But if there was no time in the sense that things progress from point A through point B, point C, and so forth and so on, it continues to go on. If there was no time, then how could there be any progression? Because things progress. We progress from intelligences to spirits to spirit with bodies to resurrected beings to gods and so forth, that can only happen if there's a progression, and progression requires time. So in the scriptures, when it says there's time no longer, what they're talking about is the time as we reckon it here on the earth is no longer. Earth's time is going to be disrupted.
Will be disrupted, right?
But God's time remains constant.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a constant. Time is one of the constants. In the theory of relativity and things like that, it talks about time as a relative. And that's not the case. Time is the constant. The speed of light is actually, they say that the speed of light is the constant and the time is a changeable thing. And instead it's the other way around. So time is a constant and the speed of light can change. And that's actually can be shown from a scientific standpoint. But that's a little bit of getting into a little bit of into a little bit of stuff there. But it's interesting because if you go to let me just read a couple more verses here. And the Lord said unto me, the planet which is the lesser light, lesser than that which is to rule the day, even the night, is above or greater than that upon which thou standest in point of reckoning. So based on how God reckons it, basically the moon is above the earth, right? I mean, that's as we see the moon, we see it as being above the earth. And it moveth in order more slow. It doesn't rotate as fast as the earth. This is in order because it standeth above the earth upon which thou standest. Therefore the reckoning of its time is not so many as to its numbers of days and of its months and of its years. The interesting thing is that the moon doesn't really have a day because it doesn't rotate. It goes around the earth and the same faces the earth all the time.
Wow.
So the moon doesn't actually even have its own day period. It's actually just part of the earth's.
Is that true with gravity. All the planets, or is that just the moon?
All of the planets rotate.
Okay.
It's the moons around some of the other planets that, because of the mass and so forth being facing in a particular direction, it actually holds it into a stasis, and it is rotating in the sense that it's going around the Earth, but it's not rotating itself.
Yeah, it's not.
Whereas the Earth is rotating itself at the same time as it's also in a rotation around the sun. And the sun is in a rotation as well, and it goes on, and everything is rotating around the governing planet, which is the planet upon which God dwells, which is the planet nigh to Kolob. And again, it's a super giant planet. So and it actually kind of tells us that a little bit here. The set time of the lesser light, which is set to rule the night. Now, the set time of the lesser light is a longer time as to its reckoning than the reckoning of the time of the earth upon which thou standest. And where these two facts exist, there shall be another fact above them. That is, there shall be another planet whose reckoning of time shall be longer still. Okay, and that would be the sun.
Right.
The sun also rotates, but it doesn't rotate as fast as the earth. It doesn't rotate in 24 hours like the earth does. Okay, it takes a lot longer for the sun. I don't know what that period is, but it's a known period. And thus there shall be reckoning of time of one planet above another until thou come nigh unto Kolob, which Kolob is after the reckoning of the Lord's time, which Kolob is set nigh unto the throne of God, to govern all those planets which belong to the same order as that upon which thou standest. So we're all part of the grand order. God is on his planet. It's a super giant planet, and all of the other planets, basically down to the earth, are enmeshed in that planet's rotation systems. Does that make sense?
Right. And if there's an order, to it, like you were just explaining with all the other planets that rotate around. There is an order to it, and if that order ever changes, we would go into entropy if that got thwarted in some way.
Yeah.
Right? And so I love the fact that everything about God is always about order, and that his principles will all sync up and work to good in that particular order versus the chaos that would like to...
From a Big Bang.
The Big Bang, yeah.
It's a big baloney bang.
It's just, confusion, and that there was just a big bang, and particles just fell together and created this plant or that animal or this human, and
Well, the Big Bang, basically, from what the scientists have actually said, it actually started from a particle that was smaller than the period at the end of this sentence. But then, of course, that begs the question, well, where did that come from? And so we actually have quotes from some of the top, physicists and the theoretical physicists in the world. They said, well, actually, at first there was nothing, and then there was this something. Okay,
Spirit.
this they have a term for it. They call it the. It's not the infinitesimal. Anyway, but basically that they said that it's then all of a sudden this just appeared out of nothing, and then began to expand rapidly, and everything in the entire universe was smaller than the period at the end of the sentence, and then it expanded to what we now know as the known universe. So my question to you is, which is harder to believe, that everything came from nothing, or that there's a benevolent God? Because both are a belief.
It's true. They both are. Well, I find
one is harder to believe than the other one.
Right. I was going to say, I find a lot of comfort and insight and downloads from knowing there is a God, because I can communicate with that God, versus believing there's nothing. And if that were the case, if I did not believe in a God, I would be terrified living on this planet, because what would be the next step if you die? That would be terrifying. I can see why people are afraid of death.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
They don't understand that there is something more to progress to evolve into. And so it's sad to see that darkness on people.
It really is. Yeah, I totally agree. And so basically verse that was verse 9. This is Abraham chapter 3 we've been reading here. And then verse 10 says, and it is given unto thee to know the set time of all the stars that are set to give light, until thou come near unto the throne of God. And the Lord said that he set all the lights in the heavens for signs and for seasons. So everything is being controlled by the planet upon which God dwells.
Which is amazing, because it's given unto thee to know the set times of all the stars. We can be given information if we get connected to God and his light.
Yeah.
It's only the ones that are in darkness, the children that, I think it's in Thessalonians where they call them the children of light. If you're following the Lord and connected to him and his creations, which is the cosmos, it's not just all about the planet Earth, as you talked about with the moon and all the other planets. It's the cosmos that we're in, but we have that connection to him with that. And so it's, to me, it's mind-boggling not to have that belief system. But
here we have, this is about as clear as you can get, but yet how many of us actually believe that the scriptures are literal? When it says about the 7,000 years of its continuance or its temporal existence. But question number 7 is kind of, again, a follow-on to this other question. It says, well, what are we to understand by the 7 seals which were with which it was sealed? And the answer from the Lord is, we to understand that the first seal contains the things of the first 1,000 years, which would essentially be the first day with God, right?
Right.
And the second, also the second 1,000 years, second day, and so on until the seventh day. Again, so that brings us to the creation. How many days did the Lord say it was? Now, some people say, well, he said it was a time, but other times he says it was a day, which sounds like if he's telling us what the exact ratio is between the planet upon which he dwells and our earth here, as we are now, then the creation of the earth was 7,000 years. 7 days, according to God, as he sits on his throne in Kolob, or at the planet Nine in Kolob, I should say.
Right.
Okay. So if that's the case, then how old is the earth? And that's a very interesting question, because Joseph Smith made the claim that the earth and the materials that the earth was made out of, that matter cannot be created or destroyed. Therefore, it's always existed. And if it's always existed, then what is the age of the earth? Well, the age of the earth would then be the time of when it became organized. Right. And I think that kind of, I just thought of this just now, just flashed into my mind. It's kind of like children. When does a child come into existence? at the moment that it becomes organized.
It's true. At conception.
It's conception.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so the moment it becomes organized, then that is when a new life form is created. And in the particular case of the earth, it's when the earth was organized into a planet. And we can go through Genesis and go through it exactly, but he gives us the exact thing. He says first there was just the great deep, which was the waters, or and that talks about the expanse or space and so forth. And essentially he's talking about a water planet being formed. And then the dry land appeared after the water planet was formed. So this is very, very completely different than what you're going to hear from your science textbooks and things like that.
Yeah.
But this is God speaking. So my question is, who are you going to believe? The professors or the Lord? And for me and my house, we have chosen to follow the Lord.
I'm with you there, Rod.
And it may sound like complete heresy and like just idiocy, and this is really stupid. But the wisdom of the wise will be shown to be foolishness.
Well,
in the face of God's knowledge.
And if people will take what we talked about earlier with what Joseph Smith is doing, if they've got their questions, it's taking it and getting into the scriptures, getting into the Lord's word, and having that be revealed to you. They can get a confirmation if that's what they. But unfortunately, what happens is we end up men following men, and that's predicted in the scriptures.
Hey, what about women?
And women, we don't want to exclude them. But it really is to the. I mean, I look at our dialogue in what we talk about on a day-to-day basis, and the reference to God is just not there. We don't look to God as the answer to our trials that we're going through. We're looking to science. We're looking to a medicine. We're looking to someone to invent this or that instead of
or psychologists or
right.
Whatever. Yeah.
And God can. I mean, even in the examples that we just read about just a couple of weeks ago with Joseph Smith being able to heal Elsa Johnson's arm, and he did it spontaneous. It was a spontaneous healing. He didn't ask her to go to the hospital and have surgery and get an x-ray, and he just healed her. And so that is the power of God, which is so much more powerful than anything man could try to create here on this earth.
It's unexplainable.
It's unexplainable.
And we have a tendency to scoff at things that we can't seem to explain. In 2 Peter chapter 3, and this is verse 8, this is just a second witness of the 1,000-year thing. It says, but beloved, be not ignorant of this one thing, that one day is with the Lord as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as one day. So here we have, even in the New Testament, a second witness of this 1,000-year relationship and one day to God. And so we have, it's twice in the scriptures there.
Right.
That's going to become more important here as we get into a few other of these things that we're going to be talking about here in just a minute. Okay, so let's go on to verse 8. I think we're on here. Okay, so we're talking about the first 1,000 years, second 1,000 years until the seventh. So there's 7,000 years that the earth will be temporally exist in existence. Now, what was the starting point? Okay, because the earth was done a week before.
Right.
The creation
exactly.
was 7 days, and my assumption is that we're not talking about 7 periods of who knows what, how many, maybe it was billions of years in each one of those days or whatever. If the Lord's telling us what it is, then that's what it is. And if that's the case, then that means that the earth had about a 7,000 year the development of the earth as a spiritual object, and then as the spiritual creation, and then there's going to be another 7,000 years of its physical creation. So there's basically 14,000 right there. But then in this particular case, it's talking about the 7 years of its temporal existence. Now, it existed temporally then, actually for 7,000 years before Adam and Eve. But I think what they're talking about here is that they're talking about the 7,000 years of its continuance or its temporal existence as it relates to Adam and Eve and God placing man and woman on the earth.
Okay.
Okay.
Right.
So that's the 7,000 years. So we're going to start the 7,000 years with Adam and Eve. That's what starts this particular round of this of counting of the years. Then we have the seven seals, and we just talked about that one. Then we have verse 8. What are we to understand by the four angels spoken of in the 7th chapter and first verse of Revelation? The answer is we are to understand that they are four angels sent forth from God, to whom is given power over the four parts of the earth. Oh boy. We're going to be talking about the four parts of the earth in just a second. To save life and to destroy. These are they who have the everlasting gospel to commit to every nation, kindred, tongue, and people. Now, that phrase, every nation, kindred, tongue, and people, I think it relates to a specific overall group of people. And that overall group, I think, relates to everyone who is part of this earth.
At one point or time.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And I'll get into that in just a second. To commit to every nation, kindred, tongue, and people, having power to shut up the heavens and to seal them to life, or to cast down to the regions of darkness. So in this verse, he's talking about these four particular angels, and they were given power over the four parts of the earth. Can we talk about the four parts of the earth for a minute?
Yeah.
Now, Kris, I'm not sure if we this may go into some. This is going to go down a bit of a rabbit hole here, but let me share with you a couple of things. One of the first things is that Orson Pratt made the claim in his book, The Works of Orson Pratt, that he was taught by Joseph Smith. So this is secondhand, so take this with a major grain of salt. That he was taught by Joseph Smith that the Earth today is approximately 1/4 of its original size.
Wow!
And that pieces of the Earth had been removed, and that's what forms the four parts or the four quarters of the Earth. Now, I know from Hebrew symbolism, and by the way, Kris is a symbolism expert here.
Wow.
Okay. So when it talks about the four corners of the Earth, what are they talking about?
Well, they're usually talking about the four corners of the earth can be the geometric form of the earth.
The representation of the earth,
yeah.
As a square or a rectangle, typically. Okay.
Yeah. And it can also be in the Egyptian, it gets into the four corners are the cardinal directions. All of these fours kind of line up with the archangels. There's four archangels. There's cardinal directions. Gets into all of these things, which is different from what you're saying, because you're talking about a part,
actual chunks of the earth,
a chunk versus a direction or a formation.
Right. But let me give you some scriptural background here for what I'm about to share with you, because I think this is going to be important, because otherwise it's going to sound really, really strange. Okay. So first off, if he's talking about so there is a difference between the four corners of the earth, which is again representation of the earth in a when you're putting it like on paper, or you're putting it into a set of mounds, or where it's a literary kind of thing. However, that also in the scriptures it talks about the four quarters of the earth. In this particular case, he's talking about the four parts of the earth, right? The four parts of the earth there. Let's go to Genesis, but not just regular Genesis, but the Joseph Smith inspired translation of Genesis, and this is Genesis chapter 14, inspired version, and I want to start with verse 33. Okay, so it says, and now Melchizedek was a priest of this order. Okay, so this is the priesthood. Therefore he obtained peace in Salem, and was called the Prince of Peace. And his people, in other words, the people of Salem, wrought righteousness and obtained heaven. How do you obtain heaven?
Down here on earth.
Yes.
Supposedly.
Yeah. And sought for the city of Enoch, which God had before taken, separating it from the earth.
Wow.
So the city of Enoch was separated from the earth, according to what Joseph Smith is saying here is the Genesis, having reserved it unto the latter days, or to the end of the world. So what's he saying here?
Well, a literal separation creates a different part of the earth, right?
Yeah. Well, that's kind of the way I'm seeing it.
Yeah. So
Okay.
another part has been separated and taken where? Taken up, taken into the heavens.
Okay,
We don't know.
Verse 35, he says, and hath said and sworn with an oath that the heavens and the earth should come together, and the sons of God should be tried so as by fire. So that means the earth is going to come together, and then it will be basically tried by fire. It will be cleansed by fire, which would then actually, if it actually melted the earth, it would actually turn into a sea of glass.
Which would make the sea of glass. Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And this Melchizedek, having thus established righteousness, was called the King of Heaven by his people, or in other words, the King of Peace. We don't know an awful lot about Salem. We do know a little bit more about Enoch. The city of Enoch, where is that today?
Not on this telestial sphere.
It's not on this planet, right? Mm-hmm. It's not here. And so the people of Salem, and Melchizedek was their leader, also achieved this same thing as the city of Enoch did. And they were apparently then removed from the earth. So that's three parts. We have the earth as it is today. Sure. We have the city of Enoch. We have the city of Salem. But there was said that there was 4 parts of the earth. What's the 4th part?
Well, we talked about this earlier. Is it the 10 tribes? Did they end up... I
think it might be the 10 tribes.
Being separated, literally, from the earth.
Yeah, because when they were driven off in the northern countries by the Assyrians in 722 BC, and they were driven into the north countries, and they were taken from the earth. Now, some of them are still here. We know that. Okay. But where is the rest of them? And an interesting little thing, now this is another tidbit, this is coming now from the end of the Doctrine and Covenants in section 133, which we'll get into in December, right. Probably. Yeah. Okay, but if we go to section 133 in the Doctrine and Covenants in verse 24, it says, and the land of Jerusalem and the land of Zion shall be turned back into their own place. And the earth shall be like as it was in the days before it was divided.
Wow,
now a lot of people think, well, that must be Pangea, because if you take the Europe and the Western Europe and the eastern part of the United States and South America, you kind of slide them both together. They have this kind of interesting fit with each other, and geologically they fit with each other. But no matter how you do it, you always end up with a hole in Pangea that just doesn't work out, and that's basically where the Gulf of Mexico is at. There's this where the Gulf of Mexico is. There's this like.
So that's where the city of Enoch was.
Okay, but think about this: if the Earth is a water planet, which Genesis says that it is, and then basically you have this huge planet, and you take a big hunk of it out, what's going to happen? It's going to close back in. So the Gulf of Mexico is actually just the little teeny scar of the overall piece of earth that was removed. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's going to be an interesting aspect. Now, also another thing from Pangea standpoint, if Pangea did exist, if it actually was one supercontinent, and it was on the earth as it is now, the earth would not be able to survive. It would be so heavy. Well, it would be, you have all this mass on one side. It's kind of like if you guys, you probably relate to this. If you have a tire and it doesn't have the weights on it, so it actually balances it. What happens when you're going down the highway? It's and for you sisters out there, if what happens if you have your your washing machine or whatever, and all the clothes get like on one side. This happens with older washing machines. Yeah. They have ways to electronically balance them now. Yeah. But basically, what happens when that starts to spin, it's like, ooh, it'll shake your whole house, right? Well, the same thing would happen with the earth. If all of that mass was on one side, there had to be counterbalancing mass of the earth to be able to actually understand how that could work. And what if it was actually 4 other counterbalancing masses around the earth? And the earth will be, in the last days, it says it will be rolled together like a scroll, Well, how does the scroll roll together? Well,
Yeah.
it rolls up onto itself, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Does it get bigger as it rolls up? Yeah, the
Mm-hmm.
roll gets thicker and thicker as it rolls up, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then in this section here in section 133, it talks a little bit about what happens when the 10 tribes return. Now, there's a couple of things about this I think are real important. Again, this is all scriptural, so I'm just laying it out here for you from the scriptures here. But let's go just for a second. Let's go. I'll actually go down here to section 133 so you can see this better. So section 133 and verse 24 is the land of Jerusalem, the land of Zion shall be turned back into their own place. The earth shall be like it was in the days before it was divided. And the Lord, even the Savior, shall stand in the midst of his people and shall reign over all flesh. Okay, and they who are in the north country shall come in remembrance before the Lord, and their prophets shall hear his voice and shall no longer stay themselves. Well, they've been staying themselves. They have prophets. If they're on the earth today, who are their prophets? Wouldn't we know them?
We would know, because I'm sure the NSA would be keeping track of everybody. And we would know about that.
and I think it would probably make sense that our prophets would know if there were other prophets on the earth right now.
Especially
and acknowledge them as prophets.
Exactly, that are tied to the Lord, that are part of...
So these prophets are apparently not on the earth, because we don't know of any other prophets that I'm aware of, like in Russia, the North countries, or maybe some Alaskans up there, some Aleuts, Eskimos up there. Maybe they have their own prophets, but if they do, nobody's talking about it.
Right.
But this also gives us an inclination that, or an indication, I should say, that they're not on the earth. It says, and shall no longer stay themselves, and they shall smite the rocks. What's the earth made out of? And the ice shall flow down at their presence. What's in the north countries? We have the North Pole, right? And then we have ice. It says, and a highway shall be cast up in the midst of the great deep. Now that's an interesting thing based on what you said about the great deep and what that means to Egyptians. So tell us again what that means.
Again, the great deep was always a reference to the heavens. The Egyptians believed that the way to escape this world was with a solar bark, which is an ancient ship, and you got on the ship after your death and go up through the heavens, through the great deep, until you get to the Ahman, which is the eye of Horus that allows you to escape this world. This world meaning the firmament, whatever surrounds the planet Earth. But yeah, they all believed that anciently that the great deep was in the sky and not necessarily a reference to the water,
to the oceans.
On the earth.
Well, that is a really interesting thing, because it says a highway is going to be cast up in the midst of the great deep. Now that could be whether or not it was a highway cast up into space, okay, or if it's a highway cast up in the midst of the oceans. Either way, we're talking about Earth scale kinds of stuff. This is massive events that we're talking about happening when they return. And this is the 10 tribes when they're returning with their prophets, and then their enemies shall become a prey to them, and the barren desert shall become pools of living water. The parched ground shall no longer be a thirsty land. Because if they're bringing their prophets, I think it's interesting, barren desert shall come forth pools of what kind of water? Living water.
Living water, right.
Which is reference to what?
Well, springs, natural springs.
Natural springs and so forth. But also the Lord is the living water as well. And so if they're bringing their prophets, then their prophets have been prophesying somewhere off stage, off of this earth.
Right.
And who's going to bring them? Well, this is talking about the 10 tribes, but wouldn't the city of Enoch have their own prophets?
I would definitely think so.
And what about the city of Salem? So if these are the 4 parts of the earth, each different part has its own prophets. And they're all going to be brought together. And then this all happens right before a huge gathering that happens at this special place on this earth called Adam-ondi-Ahman. And there, all the priesthood, keys from every dispensation and every nation and kindred and tongue and people. I think that means all of them. Everybody who's ever come or stemmed from this earth
right,
is all going to be there, and all their priesthood keys will go back, and all of their prophets and all of our prophets and everybody, it's all going to go back to one person, and that's the Ancient of Days, or Adam. And then he's going to give the keys. He's going to turn to give the keys to all four parts of the earth to Christ.
That's deep stuff, Rod. But you've got...
It's from the scriptures.
I love that the scripture gives those type of descriptive words of a separation, that things are separated, and then it talks about when it comes back from being divided. I mean, it gives you that literal concept, even though we don't always want to be thinking literally, but you're getting this concept that there was a separation, that the earth in its current form, as you say, may not be what it was originally.
Well, again, it's not me saying it. This is the scriptures and Joseph Smith talking about this.
Yeah.
But this gives you a couple of other clues. He says in verse 30 here in Doctrine and Covenants section 133, and they shall bring forth their rich treasures unto the children of Ephraim, my servants. And the boundaries of the everlasting hills shall tremble at their presence. That again sounds like this is an earth scale kind of an event. This is not all of a sudden one morning they wake up and say, oh, gee, we have prophets, and oh, here they are.
Right.
Oh, by the way, we're the 10 tribes. We live up here in Russia.
And it's also a reference that the earth, all creation will be aware of that, because all creation does know truth.
Yeah. How could you not be aware?
Right.
And in fact, it talks about, Joseph Smith said that, when this all comes down, it says that what will the world say? It is a planet or a comet.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
And they shall fall down and be crowned with glory even in Zion by the hands of the servants of the Lord, even the children of Ephraim. So if they return back, if the seed of Enoch returns back, and if Joseph Smith was correct in the teachings of the prophet Joseph Smith, it actually is a reference to Joseph Smith saying that and in fact, maybe I'll just look it up really quickly here, but I'll just kind of paraphrase it. He said that the city of Enoch and the very foundations upon which it stood assumed an aerial position within our solar system.
Wow.
So there you go. Okay,
Very
so
position.
Interesting. Okay, but if you think about it, if they all come back, and if the Gulf of Mexico is the place, in fact, where this is again attributed to Joseph Smith, that it was it was removed from what is now called the Gulf of Mexico. If they come back into what the Gulf of Mexico is, that means the Gulf of Mexico is going to have to go enough to receive another Earth-sized planet.
Right. Wow. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which means that Zion is going to be very big. And in fact, I think that there was a reference that Zion was going to be 1,000 miles by 1,000 miles.
Wow.
That's a big space. And the city of the New Jerusalem will be the most great and grand and glorious city, because we've never seen anything like it. They're going to probably bring building techniques and materials possibly that we've never seen on the earth before. Now, another last little part here as we go through this, and that is that a lot of people reference the second coming. Christ can't come until after the gospel is preached to every nation, kindred, tongue, and people. But the nation, kindred, tongue, and people thing is going to be in verse 37 here. It says, and this gospel shall be preached unto every nation, kindred, tongue, and people. And the servants of God shall go forth, saying with a loud voice, fear God and give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment is come, and worship him that made heaven and earth and the sea and the fountains of waters, which is what the earth is basically made of, if the universal model information is correct. Right. Let me see here. And in verse 44, it says that, yea, when thou comest down and the mountains flow down at thy presence, thou shalt meet him who rejoiceth and worketh righteousness, who remembereth thee in thy ways. So mountains and things are going to be insignificant in comparison with this massive coming back together of the earth as it was in the days before it was divided. And the fulfillment of the gospel being preached to every nation, kindred, tongue, and people isn't going to happen until all four parts are back together. So we'll have a lot more people because the earth is going to be 4 times its size.
That's going to make some people very unhappy to have even more people on this planet.
Yeah. Well, but the planet will have expanded, right? The planet will be bigger,
yes.
and so forth. And God made this planet so that we will have enough and to spare. Mm-hmm. There will never, ever be a shortage of anything that we need as God's children, because He has made this planet for us.
Yeah, He's a God of abundance.
So, there is no shortage of anything that we'll ever need, because He's already anticipated all of our needs and He's put plenty there.
Yeah.
So we just have to have faith that that's the case. There is no shortage of anything on the planet. So, all right. So, and with that,
so we go back to.
Let's go back to section 77 here real quick, and we got to finish up here because we're running a little bit long here. But I think we kind of have a tendency to do that.
It's good stuff. I mean, it's nice to take some deep dives into some of these scriptures, because Joseph Smith was so inspired, and to get his Q&A like this and to have access to it, and then as you've pulled in Abraham and Peter and other scriptures that actually support it.
We could spend weeks on these chapters on this chapter, but here, let's just go ahead with verse 9. What do we understand by the angel ascending from the east? Revelation chapter 7, verse 2. The answer is, we are to understand that the angel ascending from the east is he to whom is given the seal of the living God over the 12 tribes of Israel. So that's now talking about this earth and probably the 10 tribes.
The 10
okay.
tribes,
Wherefore he crieth unto the 4 angels having the everlasting gospel, saying, hurt not the earth, neither the sea nor the trees, till we have sealed the servants of our God in their foreheads. And if you will receive it, this is Elias, which was to come to gather together the tribes of Israel and restore all things. Okay. All right. Do you want any comments about that?
Let's go back to it for just a minute. So, again, it's looking into the future, but the sealing and being a servant of God is what's going to protect you through everything. And that's taking that name on their forehead. And so that's an important thing. When we go through all of this upheaval, the only thing that is really going to get us through all of this is making sure that we are servants of God, that we are following Him and His instructions. And therefore we can be, as He referenced us in many different scriptures, His little children, and help us through all this. Because it sounds pretty spectacular what's going to be happening here. And it could probably blow a few minds.
I think it'll be
when
mind-boggling.
You see this highway coming down and the mountains are whatever shaking, and just seeing phenomenon that we've just never experienced before, because we've been in a relative period of time of peace, calmness, and so this is going to be very, very mind-blowing.
Yeah,
to say the least.
Yes, to say the least. Yes. All right. So, verse 10. What time are the things spoken of in this chapter to be accomplished? I mean, that's the question I would ask for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so when is it? Okay, and what does the Lord say? He says they're to be accomplished in the 6,000 years, or the opening of the 6th seal. So that's the basically right before the 7th seal, the opening of the 6th seal, in that time, in that 1,000 years time frame before the 6th seal is closed, essentially. So verse 11. What are we to understand by sealing of the 144,000 out of all the tribes of Israel, 12,000 out of every tribe? Okay, so that's going to be, this I think is in reference to the big meeting at Adam-ondi-Ahman when all the tribes are gathered together. 12,000 of each of the 12 tribes of Israel, 144,000. What is the deal with that? I mean, we have the Jehovah's Witnesses who say, well, that's the 144,000 who are saved. And then after they got over 144,000 people saved, then they were going, well, maybe we're interpreting that incorrectly.
It's a living thing that keeps moving.
It's not really 144,000. It's kind of maybe an unlimited number, but he was just putting out 144,000 as just kind of represented a big number, right? No, I think God is exact.
Yes,
He doesn't.
He is.
He doesn't say 144,000 unless he means 144,000. So who are these 144,000, and what is their purpose?
It's interesting. It says out of all the tribes of Israel. So we're looking at individuals or living creatures or people who have been living off of the planet Earth per se. Because if they've been part of the 10 tribes and that part of the earth has been lifted up, you're looking at individuals that haven't even been on this earth during our tribulation.
Wow, you're really thinking outside the box here.
But that's what we were talking about.
Well, yeah,
if you are looking at out of all the tribes, then it means you're going to have people that didn't.
Yeah, if the majority of the 10 tribes were removed from this earth, when they come back, then they're going to be part of the 12,000,
right?
Because they're part of those tribes there. And this is the answer that the Lord gave Joseph Smith. He says, we are to understand that those who are sealed are high priests, ordained into the holy order of God to administer the everlasting gospel, for they are they who are ordained out of every nation, kindred, tongue, and people. That sounds like everybody who's ever who is stemmed from this earth. Okay, by the angels, to whom is given power over the nations of the earth, to bring as many as will come to the church of the firstborn. What can you tell us about the church of the firstborn?
Well, the church of the firstborn relates to Jesus Christ, his church.
Well, he's the firstborn.
He's the firstborn after death. And so, yeah, it's all of those that will be part of his church at that time. And
now the interesting thing is that what are these, because some people said, well, those 144,000, they're missionaries, and it's to help to accomplish the work of taking the gospel to every nation, kindred, tongue, and people. Actually, that's not what he's saying here. Mm-mm. If you look at this closely, who are they? What is their purpose? Okay, to gather, to administer the everlasting gospel. They are ordained out of every nation to bring as many as will come to the church of the firstborn. Mm-hmm. They are probably not preaching to non-members of the church. These are people who are finding the elect, right? Out of not only this earth but the other earths, Enoch, Salem, and the 10 tribes. They're gathering all of those elect, right? And that is and that composed together is the church of the firstborn. Yeah, the overall church. So that's maybe that's what they're talking.
So you're looking at, I don't know what you would want to call them per se, living creatures
they're human beings. They're just like us.
Beings, yes. And but they've been in a different state because they've been in a place of righteousness where we're down here on this celestial sphere in a lot of darkness. And this is the earth that crucified its creator. Yeah. You know,
and what's interesting when the Lord says worlds without end have I created, I guess it can make a big difference if you can take one world and make it into four. Right. Yeah. So you have increase going on there, but then it's all coming back together. Okay, we got to finish up here. So verse number 12. What are we to understand by the sounding of the trumpets mentioned in the 8th chapter of Revelation? We are to understand that as God made the world in 6 days, now they didn't say periods, he didn't say 6 times, he said 6 days, and he just told us what his time frame is. And on the 7th day he finished his work and sanctified it, and also formed man out of the dust of the earth. That's how we know that that's what began. It was when God placed his children on the earth that he started to reckon time as earth time. Mm-hmm. Okay, and that tells us how important we are to God, his offspring. And sanctified, also formed man out of the dust of the earth. Even so, in the beginning of the 7,000 years will the Lord God sanctify the earth and complete the salvation of man, and judge all things, and shall redeem all things, except that which he hath not been put into his power, when he shall have sealed all things unto the ends of all things. And the sounding of the trumpets of the 7 angels are the preparing and finishing of his work in the beginning of the 7,000 years, the preparing of the way before the time of his coming. So this is Christ has several different comings in the last days, and not positively sure which one he's talking about here. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Now, just going through the idea that the sanctification and redeeming, which are the missions of Jesus Christ, are coming up in this, and how important it is that we allow ourselves to be redeemed, because we are all fallen on this celestial earth, and that all of us need to have his redemption to become sanctified, to be part of this.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, verse 13. When are the things to be accomplished which are written in the 9th chapter of Revelation? Answer, they are to be accomplished after the opening of the 7th seal, before the coming of Christ. So there's going to be, so if you study the seals and when it opens and when it closes, they are roughly in these 1,000-year increments, which are roughly days of God, each day of God, right? And so then we have the 7,000 years. Makes sense, because that's the next 7th day to God. He'll have gone through the whole week, and now it's the Sabbath again. It's time for the rest. Right. Okay. All right. What are we to understand by the little book which was eaten by John, as mentioned in the 10th chapter of Revelation? Answer, we are to understand that it was a mission and an ordinance for him to gather the tribes of Israel. Behold, this is Elias, who, as it is written, must come and restore all things.
You know, I want to make a comment about John, because we don't really talk about John in our current culture. And John, I think, has obviously we know he has a huge mission, because he's still performing his mission.
Alive.
Yeah, he's still alive.
He never died.
And it just tells us right there how he is to gather the tribes. So he basically is probably going to all of the parts of the earth, in his mission. And he works close with Jesus Christ. He was a cousin to Jesus, and so they knew each other well in this earthly realm that they lived in. But John is an amazing person that we really don't really think about or talk about or imagine what he could be doing or what he is doing to maybe ward off something worse that could be happening.
That's right.
I mean, but he's there, and he is a devoted servant to Jesus Christ, and is still with us.
I have to wonder how often he and the 3 Nephites get together and have lunch.
And hook up and say, wow, what are they doing?
Okay, how's it going in your field, in your area? Okay, verse 15. What is to be understood by the 2 witnesses in the 11th chapter of Revelation? And the answer is, they are 2 prophets that are to be raised up to the Jewish nation in the last days, at the time of the restoration, and to prophesy to the Jews after they are gathered and have built the city of New Jerusalem in the land of their fathers. Excuse me, not New Jerusalem, excuse me, I misspoke. The city of Jerusalem in the land of their fathers. So these 2 prophets are talked about. They're going to be raised up to the Jewish nation at the time of the restoration and to prophesy to the Jews.
So this is all future. So the restoration of what's going to happen to the earth and
the gathering of the Jews to Jerusalem. And has that happened yet?
Well, we've had the Israel was dedicated for the gathering of the Jews, so that door has been opened, and we've had a Jewish state established, which is in its 71st year, I believe.
I think doesn't President Trump move the headquarters from Tel Aviv?
The embassy was moved to Jerusalem.
In recognition of
the recognition, yes. So there is the Jewish state. So there is a gathering that has taken place there.
So a lot of people say, but the Jews are not all gathered. But interestingly enough, about 6 or 7 years ago, there was a Pew Research study where they actually were trying to find out where do Jews live in the world, and they found out that 93% of all Jews worldwide live in one of 2 places: Jerusalem and New York.
I was going to say that, New York.
No, it's actually America.
Okay, America.
But
okay, New York.
But it's interesting because those are the 2 promised lands, and they're 93% gathered. So if you're one of those who are waiting, well, Christ isn't going to come because the Jews aren't gathered. They're gathered.
They're gathered.
For all intents and purposes, they're gathered.
Yeah.
So watch out, because Christ could be coming anytime.
It's true. They have their homeland. They have a place that they can call home again. And so that's how do you gather? How does anyone gather? But they go back to their homeland.
Yeah.
They go back to where their roots come from, and so yeah.
So going back to Jerusalem would be one place, but what if their homeland also originally, if you come back to Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, their original homeland was here in America.
Mm-hmm. You know, and our founding fathers were very astute to that, and they even wanted to consider having Hebrew as the language, the official language here in the United States, because they understood this to be the New Jerusalem.
Yeah, in fact, they even mentioned that one day there will be a New Jerusalem on this land, here in America. And they were right. They just hadn't met Joseph Smith yet because he wasn't born.
Not yet. No, they missed. Thomas Jefferson missed the window. He died in 1830 on July 4th. Yeah. And
along
the
with
church
John
had just gotten established.
Yeah.
You know, he just missed it. Just missed because he was waiting for that.
But he was so instrumental in preparing it.
Yes.
And setting the stage so that everything would work out for the restoration of the gospel. Mm-hmm. I mean, God's ways are so beautiful and it's so miraculous. When you look back and you can see that, it gives me a little bit more of a cause to doubt the scholars and the scientists and so forth, and to just trust God. These are his words. These are not my words or Joseph Smith's words. These are the Lord's words. Do we trust them, brothers and sisters, or do we not? Do we rely on our own understandings? Because so many things like how did John the Revelator, how does he not die? How did the three Nephites, how do they not die? There's things that we can't answer. We can't answer how exactly is it that 4 pieces of the earth can be brought back together. The closest thing that you can understand with that is the universal model, when you understand that this is not, the planet is not made in the same way that we're all told and taught from our science courses. So it really is, it's a choice. You really have to decide which it's going to be. We may actually be around long enough to see the fulfillment of this and be able to verify, okay, this is what happened, this is what's real, or okay, this is all bogus. At
one time, I wasn't really sure that could be the case, but now with how things have sped up and with what we are experiencing, it very well could be, because we do know we have to go through a lot of darkness before we come through the restoration. Yeah.
A lot of impurities have to be removed
before
we can become as our Heavenly Father is, and before we have in us his likeness. Mm-hmm. And that's what we're really after here, folks. So I know this has got a little bit long. I hope this has been something that has been new for you. I think it probably will be for most folks.
Yeah, it's made me think some new things, and I can create a new list of questions to take to the Lord, which we all should be doing. Even after you hear any presentation, always make your list and take those questions to the Lord and get your own confirmation.
Say, okay, Lord, is this really how it is? And then, but you do have to study that in your mind first. I mean, he doesn't just give you the answers. So it's not like with the peep stone in a hat thing, where he just gave Joseph Smith just the translation already done and all in a nice little bow. He didn't have to do anything or think. He just could read it off the stone. No, he actually had to put effort, time, and energy into his translation, and that required effort on his part. Mm-hmm. All right. Anyway, everybody, thank you so much for joining us. I hope that you'll join us again next week. Don't forget to hit, if you've enjoyed this, hit the like button down here at the bottom here. We have our conference coming up here in September, and we're excited about that. It's going to be a live conference, and just maybe you might hear Kris give us some additional insights in some of the symbolism. She is an amazing individual. I'm so grateful to have you come and share a little bit of your time. And
it's been a pleasure. Fascinating.
Just a tiny little snippet of your knowledge that you have in the symbolism stuff here, because you have just a breadth and depth of that is just really it's not common.
Thank you.
People don't have that kind of knowledge usually. So
well, it's been a pleasure.
All right. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next week.